Alright guys, so to qualify for this list, a car has to either be overpriced, hideous, or downright garbage. So we're not gonna waste no time with no long intro, let's just go ahead and jump right in. It might surprise you that a Honda made this list. Well, there's two of them on this list. Actually, there's three if you want to include Acura, but we'll get to those later. First, let's talk about this thing, the Honda Accord Crosstour. So here was the plan. Put an Accord on stilts and make it a hatchback. Make it look like a car but give it the utility of an SUV, and hopefully that would appeal to people who just refuse to get a crossover. That was pretty much the idea of the Crosstour. The overall execution of this thing was just a huge mess because it looked as though it couldn't decide if it wanted to be a sedan or a crossover. The Crosstour was oddly proportioned and just looked awkward from about every angle. When it comes down to their vehicles, Honda is usually a winner, but not this time. Even they could not ignore the evidence of this massive failure they had on their hands. The regular Accord sedan and CR-V sold well over 300,000 units each year, but the Crosstour barely sold 30,000 in its first year. But that's not all. Things got even worse for the Crosstour and sales were rapidly declining after the first year and so on. I'm not gonna lie, this sounded like a good idea at first, but Honda's attempt at a modern wagon just didn't go as planned. Matter of fact, the Crosstour was doomed from the start because when it first came out, everybody, even myself, people made fun of it. Everyone laughed. And maybe even worse, Forbes.com said, everyone wants something practical. What they don't want is an Accord that's really ugly with a hatchback and doesn't really have that much room, and that's what the Crosstour is. Ouch. Sure, the old Accord wagons from the 90s had a loyal following, but the new modern version just didn't catch on. Anyway, Honda threw in the towel, and after just a single generation, the Crosstour was crossed out. And you know what? Since the Crosstour is gone, the car world has been a better place ever since. Next up, we have the Nissan Juke. According to Nissan, the Juke's design took some inspiration from the visor of a motorcycle helmet. As strange as that might sound, well, so is everything else about this small SUV. The Juke is just a hot mess, and if I could just use one word to describe it, that word would be over-designed. The parking lights were disguised as headlights, and the real lights were disguised as fog lights, I guess? And the real fog lights were inconspicuously nestled in the bumper. I understand the designers were trying to be cool and wanted to appeal to a younger demographic, but the overall styling of this thing was just weird. The Juke reminds me of a frog, and unfortunately, that turns out to be an attribute that people don't want in an automobile. No one ever said to themselves, I like the way this AMG drives, but I'm quite upset that it doesn't look like an amphibian. Forget the Pontiac Aztek, there are plenty of other SUVs out there that are quite ugly, and the Acura ZDX is one of them. No, not this one, this one. With the first generation ZDX, Acura really tried to be different. This SUV has such a terrible design, everyone and their mother thought it was Acura's version of the Crosstour, but twice as much money. With its quirky design and Acura's notorious bird beak grille up front, people just didn't buy the thing. Sales numbers were quite embarrassing for the ZDX, and as a result, this model had a relatively short production run. No, this was not an upscale Accord Crosstour, but rather a modified version of the popular MDX. Either way, Acura put this abomination out of its misery in 2013. Some things are just a bad idea, and this car is a perfect example of that. The proper name of this car is the Nissan Murano Cross Cabriolet, but for this video, we'll just refer to it as the Murano CC. I'm not sure how true this is, but rumor has it that Nissan's former CEO Carlos Ghosn pushed the Murano CC into production because his wife liked the idea of it. Well, his wife liked the idea of it, but as it turned out, not too many other people did. This two-door convertible crossover was a packaging disaster and visually challenged, whether its top was up or down. Motor Trend magazine said, the idea was bad, the execution was bad, and the styling, well, it is just terrible. In a different report, they also mentioned the Nissan Murano CC is destined to go down in history as the most stupid vehicle of 2011. Let's consider the changes Nissan had to make to the Murano in order to create this convertible. They had to chop the roof, give it new doors, and modify the rear quarter panels and the rear deck. So it's not a big surprise the asking price of this thing was over 47 grand. Sales were quite miserable and there just wasn't a whole lot of consumer demand. That said, it was also discontinued after a relatively short run. Next on this list we have the Subaru B9 Tribeca, an ugly name for an ugly SUV. So pretty much Subaru said that the B9 Tribeca's front end was inspired by Alfa Romeo cars of the 1930s. I guess maybe if you squint really hard you might see a resemblance to those, but I don't like looking at this thing at all. When this thing came out, it made people gag and laugh more than it made them go out and buy one. It had an inexplicable name, and don't get me started about that front grille. Like, what the I have no idea what was going through the minds of Subaru designers when they came up with this atrocity. But the fact that it only lasted 2 years before getting a design update should tell us something about it. Anyway, the execs at Subaru could not ignore the public's reaction to this automotive abomination, so they rushed out an updated model with a less controversial front end. They even dropped the unnecessary B9 part from the name. To be quite frank, this is the one they should have had from the get-go. Ah yes, this list would not be complete without a Dodge or Chrysler product. So let's talk about the Nitro. I remember seeing this SUV when it first came out. People said it looked rugged. Well, to me it looked cheap and cheesy. You know, I saw this as the Family Dollar version of a Hummer H3. Well, despite its rough exterior design, the only thing that was actually rough about this vehicle was the ride quality. And as a bonus, customers got poor fuel economy, so-so off-road capabilities, as well as an underpowered engine that did not provide adequate acceleration. Oh, and I almost forgot, this wouldn't be a mid-2000s Dodge product without the notoriously cheap Fisher-Price interior. Most automotive reviewers considered the Nitro to be a bad car because of all this. Consumer Reports said the cabin is noisy and the ride is harsh. Overall, the Nitro has little going for it. The driving position is awkward, plus fit and finish is subpar. Well, here's what I have to say. If life is unpleasant and you want it to be more unpleasant, then buy a Nitro. Let's talk about the Lincoln MKT. There was a time when Lincoln produced some gorgeous machines for people with hefty bank accounts, but unfortunately they started making things like this. I remember seeing this thing when it first came out and I said to myself, wow, this is one hideous piece of automobile. Then, you know, I wonder if being hideous was one of its selling points. Now to be fair, this really wasn't a bad car on a mechanical level, it was just bad in the looks department. That horrible grille and the questionable taillight assembly around back. And I mean, check this thing out, what is up with that creepy grin? It looked like it has a sinister grin. And let's not forget the weird proportions. It reminded me of a hearse, except this one was for live passengers. Well, at least this isn't as bad as the Nitro because this car actually has a good ride quality. Next up we have the Toyota Mirai. Yes, we do have sedans on this list. If you can even call this thing a sedan, that is. I don't even know where to begin because other than the wheels or door handles, there's not a single aspect of this car that isn't repulsive. If the beauty of a car could be translated to music, the Mirai would sound like the noise you would hear when someone screeches their fingernails against a chalkboard. As you know, these car makers are not so thrilled about building electric vehicles and the mandates, since it's really difficult to profit off EVs. So we have to give BMW some credit in the way they decided to take on this problem. Their idea was to create a car so ugly that anyone with properly functioning eyes would be repulsed by it and have no interest in purchasing one. But what about those who didn't mind the horrible exterior design? Well, BMW thought of that too. And the i3's interior, BMW continued the visual assault. The whole setup was just weird and was sure to deter any prospective buyer that managed to get past the exterior. Either way, with the potential buyers of this car deterred, BMW could claim that no one wanted electric cars. I just cannot be nice to this car. The clarity looks as though it was the love child of a Civic hatchback and an Accord, with maybe a little bit of 1983 Prelude mixed in. This car has awkward proportions and design elements that are trying too hard to be futuristic. Then you got these weird little wheel skirts at the back that adds to this polarizing appearance. This type of car might be easy on the environment, but it's not easy on the eyes. Even the original Honda Insight from back in the day featured similar wheel skirts over its rear wheels. They didn't look good back then and they definitely don't look good now. And that does it for this list. Check back soon for more videos as I will be roasting more cars from various decades. Thanks for watching and I'll see you on the next one.